But Pluto went into Aquarius, and we look at the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and a bunch of other colonial revolutions that happened because people were no longer going to put up with the hierarchy, the monarchies of that time. And we see it as the oligarchies of our time, overreach of government, of corporations. We are actually ruled by oligarchies. There are 5 corporations that control 90% of the food supply in the United States of America. And you can see them on a map, and they have trade agreements to not encroach. Does this sound a lot like 1700s era, like Europe and the colonial areas? Like we are in a time where it may not be a monarchy, but it is an oligarchy. And it's not just corporations, it's other things. And we also see people finding values-based communities. That's very Aquarian. And we're going to see more of that happening with Pluto in Aquarius. Capricorn likes to make the rules. Pluto went into Capricorn in 2008. Okay. A bunch of stuff got broken. And then Capricorn set up all these rules. This is how it has to be. And this is when corporations were really able to take over. And now Aquarius is, okay, now let's break the rule.
Hello, my name is Moon Tucker, and this is the Let's Talk Shift podcast, a place where we have deep conversations about the shift in human consciousness, what that means to us collectively, what it means to us individually, and then, of course, always, how do we make it through this with a little bit more fun? Because, oh my God, we just need more fun in our lives. And so I would love to introduce a dear friend of mine and somebody that I'm learning an esoteric wisdom from that I literally never expected to enjoy, appreciate, or find any value in. I was a complete 100% skeptic, and Christina has really moved that ball along and got me over that hump of I don't believe. And so Christina Courtright Jenkins is an essence revealer. Christina, I am so excited to introduce you to my audience and have them learn a little bit about you and this amazing esoteric wisdom that you bring to the masses on such a understandable scale. Christina has really helped me move the needle from a non-believer to not only a believer, but believing that the esoteric wisdom that she brings to the masses is absolutely essential in the shift in human consciousness right now. Christina, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Moon. I'm so excited, so honored to be here and talking about one of my most favorite topics of astrology.
Astrology, yes. And oh, for those in the audience that are rolling their eyes back in their head saying, oh, what's your sign? And oh my God, Mercury in retrograde. Yes, I get you. I get you. And what I'm curious most about, Christina, before we really get into the nuts and bolts of why this is such a powerful wisdom that you can use on your daily life, were you ever skeptical?
So that is a great question. And there have obviously been times in my life when I've gone, is this real? Is this really real? And every time I've always come back to an absolute yes, it is real. So my introduction to astrology, although I am a secret 4th generation astrologer, my great-grandmother was the foremost Western astrologer in the early 1900s. She lived in Salt Lake City, Utah, and she gave readings to all of the Western governors, many other high-profile people in the Western United States. And so that's the family secret that we were trying to be kept from, is that this really runs in our family. And then it skipped a few people, but it came out really strong in some of us. And so that's a fun thing. But as a kid, even though this secret knowledge was tried to be kept from me, Sunday newspapers, you bet I was reading it. I don't know why I was drawn to it, but I was fascinated by it. And my birthday is June 21st. And had I been born just an hour earlier, I would be a Gemini. I'm actually a Cancer sun at 0 degrees, 5 minutes of Cancer. But I always identified as a Gemini. And so I would always read that. And then that led to other things. So in my very small town library, and I did have the opportunity to live all over the world, which allowed me to see different viewpoints and different belief systems. none of them having to do with astrology, but definitely opening my mind to different types of thinking. And so I would go into like the occult section of the library and I would read about astrology and tarot and all these other very taboo things that I knew that if I went home and told my family about this, that this would be very dangerous for me to do. Fear of getting kicked out of the pack. And that wasn't a real, like the parents were good parents. Like they were not going to actually kick me out, but it felt, oh, then I'll be curtailed. I won't be able to go and do these things. I'll have restrictions, so I won't be able to have this freedom. So I knew inherently this was not something that you talked about at Sunday dinner, ever, ever. So yes, as I learned more, I started to wonder. And as I became a teenager and there was more information about astrology that I was aware of, but it was all debunking and all trying to talk about how it was just garbage, etc. Blah, blah, blah. We know what this is. And so I stepped away from it a little bit, but there was always just this little thing that was really interesting to me. And I cast my first chart in the early 90s. And I just couldn't deny that there was some legitimacy to this stuff. But I just kept it under the radar and just did my own thing and everything. Then when computer programs came out and became accessible to the masses, I had stepped away from it for a while, like actively, and I cast my own chart. And I was actually a Cancer sun. This sounds super silly, but I actually went through this like existential crisis because
That does not.
I had identified as a Gemini and not as a Cancer in my sun sign. And so then I was like, I believe that this can't be true. And I really stepped away from it for a bit.
Now, I'm going to hold a second
And
because our audience might not know what sun sign means and why it matters.
okay, let's talk about this. So yes, the sign. So in a birth chart, the moment you were born, there was like a photograph taken of the sky or this blueprint, this imprint of the sky at the moment you were born. Now, I believe that we chose this before. We knew what we needed to do in this life, how our souls were going to evolve. And so we picked that. So we would have the cosmic wind at our back, or we would have some challenges that would show up that would help us navigate this life. So in this, there are the planets, which are the Mercury, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, all the way out to Pluto. But then there's also the signs. So this is Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, and so forth. And the planets are like the actors. Everybody has the same actors on the stage of their life. The signs are the role that they're playing for this particular person in this particular life. So a sun in my chart happens to be playing the role of Cancer. Did that help explain things?
Yes. Yeah. And how I'm starting to, and this is me trying to grasp these things and put it into layman's terms and overlay other things that I understand. So when we're talking about this snapshot, this blueprint of when you're born, that's like the snapshot, the blueprint of which sperm fertilized the egg. It infused information because we are stardust. Earth is sibling part of Mars and Jupiter and the sun. Like we all really are one. And just like the earth has a shamanic resonance, it has a heartbeat, it has a song that it sings. Every planet does as well. And all those songs and those heartbeats express themselves in particular repetitive known ways. So that then is becoming the archetype, right? And then as I see the signs, it's if you look at the face of a clock, each sign is in a space in the sky. And when I was born, there were certain planets that were, for example, in 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, and those are called our houses. And those are different aspects of our personality and our life. Am I understanding that in a way that makes sense?
100%. You're making so much sense. I love that analogy. And when we talk about the houses, going back to the theater, the stage analogy, those houses represent different areas of our life. So yourself, your body, your health, your career, your family, your children, all these different aspects of your life are in these different stage directions or places on the stage in which this action is taking place. So that's so personal because that goes around. It takes Mercury about 88 days to go around the sun. So we get a lot of Mercury going around almost like it goes around 3 times at least for every one of our years. But Mars is a little bit slower. It takes about 2 years, 2.5 Earth years to go around. So it moves a little bit slower. So everybody who was born on my birthday has a sun in Cancer. They have their Venus in Gemini. They have their Mars in Cancer, etc. The difference is, where is it in the houses?
Okay.
And what are the aspects? What are they? How are they speaking to each other? Because if you've ever seen a chart, and if you haven't, they're easy to find online. In fact, maybe we could drop a link
Absolutely.
for an easy chart. You'll see all these lines in the middle of it. And that's the sacred geometry that the planets form with each other as they're going around. That is how they're communicating with each other. And so that sacred geometry also creates, in this pattern of stardust that we have, an imprint in the being of the person that's born at that particular time.
That's the first time I've heard sacred geometry being brought up in describing the patterns between the planets. And for me, that gets me a little bit more clarity, because science is now proving that sacred geometry and the sounds that create sacred geometry affect our cells. They are now discovering that we can heal diseases and reverse aging and move massive boulders with sound by understanding the influence of sound and sacred geometry on the physical form. So that just adds another layer of clarity. And so that would be what we're talking about. It's like the trine is a triangle, right? And so they have these different
Perfect.
names.
Yeah. And a square creates a right angle, or a sextile is a shorter distance. But there's all these different ways that the planets are communicating to each other. And so when you look at a chart and you see all those lines, you can see. And so, for example, a trine, like, that's a lucky break. That's just cosmic wind at your back that's really helpful and beneficial. A sextile is like a lucky break that requires a little bit of effort. Okay. So it's handed to you, but you've got to do something about it. Squares present an opportunity to get strong because it's challenge energy. I like to think of squares like lifting weights. It doesn't always feel that good, but it builds a stronger muscle. And so it's for your good. And an opposition creates a choice point where you get to choose in so many aspects of your life, especially in the themes of the particular houses where that opposition is taking place. What are you going to choose? Are you going to choose health or sickness? Are you going to choose me or we? Are you going to choose? And there's not a right or wrong necessarily choice. It's just these choice points that happen throughout. So those are just a few of the ways that the planets talking about together, called aspects, that really help inform what is your life going to be like based on what are the planets out in the sky currently. What is the sacred geometry? There's two conversations going on. There's the conversation that's the snapshot of when you were born, that's lifelong. But then there's all these other conversations as the planets have transited through the sky, lining up with or creating other sacred geometry with what you have in your birth chart or the snapshot.
Okay, that really helps break it down. That really helps me get over a lot of the skepticism. And it also, your breakdown of the trines and the squares and the oppositions, that really helps. I would like to take some of that information and let's look at some of the other things that are being really widely spread and I think propagated for whatever the motivation is. And I think a lot of it is lack of understanding and a desire to feel like we have community and like maybe that we're more empowered or disempowered and giving ourselves excuses for why things aren't working. But let's start with the Mercury retrograde. Like, it sounds like if there's sacred geometry, that can move boulders and it can also drop boulders, right? So why does Mercury retrograde only have a negative connotation? And is that just some social spin? Or is there more for us to really glean from that and learn from it?
Yes. So you always have a choice of whether you're going, and I see it all the time. Like, I see a lot of astrologers, and to be honest, especially really beginning astrologers who really don't even know what they don't know, really trending negative.
Yes.
Like, really trending negative. Why? I think it's for the same reason that it's mostly negative news that we see on our feeds, because people, like, they get sucked into that negativity. It's so much easier to fall into that and to be stuck in the doom and gloom. And then You don't actually have to take personal responsibility for the fact that you have choice. If there are all these powers that be like Mercury retrograde that are making things challenging. I think Mercury retrograde. So Mercury rules thought, expression, intellect, the way that we communicate. This is what Mercury rules. If you think about Mercury, it was the messenger of the gods. Here's a pro tip. The Mercury is always in service to the sun. Mercury itself has actually a very low density energy. It's always showing up in how it can serve the sun. Again, Mercury is the messenger of the gods. And so what does that mean? Mercury is going to highly inform how my sun, no matter what the sign is, how my sun expresses itself, because your sun is your creative brilliance. It's the gifts. It's your broad. The sun is the brightest thing in their solar system. And so the sun is how we are shining brightly in our community. And that's everything from by ourselves to like globally. How are we shining? Mercury serves that. So when Mercury goes retrograde, it looks like it slows down, stops, and moves backward, slows down, stops, and moves forwards. This is an astronomical, meaning astronomy, the guys that study the skies and are all sciencey. Okay. This has been a phenomenon that we have observed from Earth as long as people have been looking at the stars. Okay. So this is a real phenomenon, but it is an optical illusion. Obviously, the planets are not actually slowing down and going backward in their orbit. That is ludicrous. But think of it like on a track. If you're running a track, so you're orbiting, at some point when the person coming up to you is going to pass you, there's an optical illusion. You can see this when you watch track events. There's a point where it looks like the one person who's moving is slowing down as they're being overtaken by another planet. If we lived on Venus, Earth would go retrograde.
Interesting.
Because it's simply an optical illusion as the orbits, because all the planets travel at different speeds around the sun, so around the same track. But some of them are way out on the outer track where it's a lot farther from the center point of the sun. Mercury is super speedy and fast. And so Mercury retrograde, or all the planets go retrograde, like I said, except for the sun, the moon, and the earth, it gives us a time to rethink, rewrite, reassess, reanalyze. All of these things have to do with Mercury retrograde. It's really an invitation to slow down. When we're being highly impacted by a Mercury retrograde, it's because we're living outside of the cycle. Mercury retrograde wants us to just slow down. It's like the phases of the moon, where if we pay attention, if you were to journal, and here's an invitation to the audience, just journal, start on a new moon and just journal like a one line a day about how you feel, and just observe how you feel. Do you feel like you want to slow down? The waning phase of the moon invites us to do that. The waxing phase of the moon invites us to go and to get things done. We're so out of touch of living in cycle in Western society that we're not paying attention to Mercury retrograde, to this thought of rethinking and reanalyzing. And those are important phases in whatever we are thinking or creating. If we're just constantly thinking and always moving forward and never slowing down to rethink, that's not healthy. So Mercury retrograde, yeah, it's real. Mercury is about communication. So sometimes we have communication glitches. And so I do think that can actually happen. I think blaming your problems on Mercury retrograde it's just an invitation for you to slow down and really get more clear in who and how you are speaking. What are you thinking about and what needs to be reassessed? Because it might actually not be that great of an idea, or it might be a great idea. And through this rethinking process, it becomes a greater idea. So there's all these things that it invites us to do. So is Mercury retrograde real? It 100% is. And it goes retrograde about 25% of its orbit, more than any other planet, because it's close to us and it's close to the sun. The outer planets spend about half of their time in retrograde, but we don't really feel that as much because we're more used to it. If you were born with a Mercury retrograde, you're also just not going to experience the Mercury retrograde like we do. Blaming Mercury retrograde for everything, everyone. If you've been doing it, unless it's tongue in cheek, just stop.
Just stop.
Just stop and look inside and go, oh, it's time to reflect on what's actually happening here.
Okay, and so let's take that because that's really great information. And you said Mercury is always serving the sun. So let's go with the sun sign of Cancer. You and I are both sun. You're early, I'm late.
Yep.
I'm on the cusp of Leo. You're on the cusp of Gemini. So when Mercury is in the let's refine and reflect, what would it benefit a person to know about their sun sign? How do we marry those two things? Because that's a lot of reflection on your sun sign, which you said are your talents and your gifts. And so that's a lot of time to refine, I see. So how do I use that to refine maximally?
Perfect. So looking at your sun sign and what you would do with that. So it's nice to know where Mercury is in your chart also. I'll give you a hint though. Mercury is always either in the same sign as your sun, the sign ahead of your sun, or the sign behind your sun. Mercury is never more than one sign away from the sun. So as a Cancer sun, I know when somebody tells me they're like a Cancer sun, I know in my mind, okay, you either got a Cancer Mercury, a Gemini Mercury, or a Leo Mercury. Is one of those. It can't be anything different. And so how that shows up is going to be just a little bit different. But if it's in service to the sun, as Cancer suns, it's time for us to rethink about our feelings, perhaps, because Cancers are such deep feelers. Is there a feeling that we've experienced that feels more real than it needs to? Because I don't want to say that feelings aren't real. They are 100% real. And sometimes those feelings can really be expanded in a way that may not serve us or diminished. Is there something that we need to rethink and maybe we let that thing go, but it's really just festering inside of us? So rethinking some of these feelings. And then this is a little bit more advanced, but just knowing what your sun sign as Cancer, we are deep feelers, we're intuitive, we're very much the mother of the zodiac. We're highly impacted by the moon because the moon is the ruler of Cancer. And that's going to look really different than, say, a sun in Leo. So if Mercury retrograde is happening and your sun is in Leo, for example, this might be rethinking the ways that you're being creative or redoing a creative project in some way, or rethinking about reanalyzing how you feel about shining brightly, because Leos shine brightest when they're playing, being creative, and having fun. And so this rethinking, reanalyzing, reassessing, pick the re. Now, a little bit more advanced is if you know where the Mercury retrograde is happening in your natal chart. Those are the themes that are going to come up, and it's going to show up differently because where your Cancer sun is in a different house than where my Cancer sun is. So if there's a Mercury retrograde, say in the sign of Virgo, where is Virgo in your chart? That's going to be the place that the energy, like you've got this cosmic wind at your back. I always like to think of cosmic wind. Is the cosmic wind like pushing me along, or is it like going towards me and it's making it just a little bit, I need to move a little bit slower, but I can still make progress or sit still, get into the eye of the storm. I think there's no rule that says you can't do that.
This is beautiful. And this brings up to mind, I know what my strengths finders are, and I know what my Myers-Briggs is, and I know what my human design is, and all of these other assessment tools that are super powerful. I've gotten so much out of all of them, and they're static. Like when my human design, the lady that did my reading, she's, oh, you have a lot of melancholy in your life. And you came in with that. And that, yeah, suicidal multiple times and life of depression and all these things. But I was left with a then what? Now what? How do I make that, if that's the thing that I'm here to experience and therefore to integrate, not overcome necessarily, but integrate, love and release and transform, where do I go with that? And it left me without any real life right now today tools. And so overlaying astrology over your favorite personality assessment tool, gene keys, whatever it is, seems like it's okay, here's your blueprint that you've got from all of these other things. And here's another blueprint. This one's living. This one is a daily experience of here's what's happening in your environment. Here's what's happening inside of you. Let's match them up and give you some insight tools. Like, it's one thing to know how a car drives. Get in, you turn the key, push the gas brakes, the basics, right? It's another thing to know the nuances of how that car is made. You can get so much performance out of it. You can plan trips and experiences based on the capacity of your vehicle instead of going into something that you're not designed to do. So that's like one of the beautiful insights that I'm seeing from this.
I love that. And I love that analogy. One of the analogies that I use is that the astrology is the map of your life, and your human design is the vehicle through which you're going through that life. Now, having said that, hey, I've got a big hill coming up here. Like, I better check the oil and make sure I can make it up there. Or, oh, look, I've got this nice long coast breezy thing. I'm going to give my car just a little bit of rest. I'm going to put it in neutral and just let it coast down this hill. So knowing these things about your map and that the road is changing depending on what's happening in the sky, just like you said, and you could use anything. By Myers-Briggs, like, these are different vehicles, or maybe we want to think of them as like different upgrades to your vehicle. But the astrology provides the map and the terrain. How are you going to traverse that, knowing that you've got some of these things coming, a big windy road? How do you want to take that? And that's what the astrology can provide for you, both from your birth chart and how that is being impacted by what's happening currently in the sky.
Beautiful. I've got one more area that I want to look at so that the audience has a deeper understanding of it. And then I want to roll into the big five. So, okay, you have talked a little bit about houses. And when I started listening to some YouTube influencers with astrology, they would say, this is in this house. And this means that an older sibling or a younger sibling is going to do this or that. And no, there's no siblings to influence my life. What does that mean? And this is the ruler of communications and electronics and the internet. And I'm thinking, this map is thousands of years old. How did then this house get assigned something that is new? Like, where was that just made up because, now the culture has changed and we've got these things, and so we're going to squeeze this into this house? How does that shift, and why should I believe any of it?
I think that is a brilliant question. And again, I think this is a place where, as astrologers, we could do a better job. So a couple of things. When you're listening to an astrology reading, and I see them all the time, here's your reading for this Leo full moon or whenever it happens to be, I'll tell you what they're using. They're using your rising sign to make an educated guess about where all those houses go in. Now, it may or may not be correct. And this is why I've had people ask me, and I'm going to come back to the other question, but aren't you worried that with all the availability, with all the apps, with all the things, that your job is going to become obsolete? And my answer is, I am not worried about that. I'm going to use another analogy, Google Translate. That is such an amazing tool. You can go anywhere and you can have conversations with people using Google Translate. But it lacks the nuance of a person to person. I'm reading your energy. This is going beyond the words. There are other words I can use that have a similar meaning, but there's just the slightest nuance that really gets the message across. And that's what an actual astrologer can do. I think that the apps, everything like those are fine places to start. But if you really want to get real, there is nothing that can replace a good astrologer who also asks you questions. As an astrologer, I would never be like, your siblings. I would say, tell me about your relationship with your siblings. And you would say, I don't have siblings. And I would go, okay, let's look at what else this could mean in this chart, because this is showing up in the house of siblings. But this house of siblings is also the house of short distance travel, of education, of expression, like the Mercurian themes. This leads to, how do things get assigned as things move forward? And I want to tell a quick story. So Chiron is actually what got me back into astrology. I went to a reader, and I'd gone through a few and I just hadn't loved them. And I had this reader and she talked to me about Chiron, and it changed my life because I was like, oh, there it is. That's actually this piece that has been missing. Chiron was discovered in 1977. Chiron is our woundedness. Chiron is the core wounds that we come with that can become our healing wisdom. It's the place where we have the deepest compassion. In 1977, this is when psychoanalysis was coming back into vogue because it was in with Jung and Freud and all of this, but then we really moved away from it and it got quote unquote debunked. And it was just a bunch of nonsense and let's get scientific. And then in 1977, many things had happened. The Enlightenment movement of the 60s, et cetera. So in 1977, when it was discovered, people were ready to look at their wounds and not just keep shoving them down or not just feel like that was fate, the hand you got dealt, and there was nothing you could do. People wanted to heal their wounds. And we started talking about the inner child and I think en masse. Okay. There were corners of people talking about this. It was spoken about in some academic corners, but en masse, it wasn't happening until 1977. We were ready at that time for Chiron to be discovered. Uranus was discovered in the late 1700s. Now, in addition to all the revolution that was happening back then, that was also the beginning of the industrial age. And so Uranus came in at this time when collectively in humanity, we were ready to understand what that means and embody the energy of that celestial body that had been out there orbiting for certainly as long as we've been on the earth. And so when these planets are discovered, it's at a time when collectively we can handle the energy. We become aware of the energy. So then as astrologers, then we can help us do something about it. Because Uranus rules technology, that wasn't a word that we were necessarily using back in the words of the Industrial Revolution, but these Uranian themes got put in these things. So when new information comes up or we become aware of new things, for example, Uranus rules AI. Why? Because it's technology. It's not like Uranus was discovered and astrologers were like, hey, look, it's the new ruler of Aquarius. Awesome. No, they wait and they take time and they see what shows up and they look at it in the transits. And now that we have this software, it's really easy to do. But even before, you could, with an ephemeris, you could cast charts way back and go, okay, what do we know from history from this time? Mm-hmm. Let's draw some themes from this. Oh, it looks, and then let's look at when it was in this sign. Okay, here are some common themes. And so then these themes can get bundled and put in with the particular ruler or the particular sign with which it aligns. And
kind of reminds me of the Bible code. It's if you know that an event happened, you can find it being predicted in the Bible code, but you have to know it happened first. Yeah. And so that's how this kind of seems to me.
And when we talk about, so I do want to make sure that we talk about Pluto in Aquarius, because this is so pertinent to the shift, because the last time Pluto was in Aquarius was in the late 1700s. It was the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. Uranus was discovered. And so all history repeats itself in the way that it casts a long shadow. And so what comes with each of these big transits, those outer planets, when they transit, it takes a long time to go around. We're not 100% sure what it looks like, but we do know that, again, back in the early 1500s, there was another time that Pluto was in Aquarius. This was the Reformation. We know that if we look back into the 1200s, Pluto was again in Aquarius. We had the Magna Carta and more power to the people. Power to the people. I know it gets a little bit overused. But that is the theme of Pluto in Aquarius. And so that's a massive thing that we've got.
Yeah. And I'm very excited. I have a quick question on that because Pluto's in Aquarius right now, and it's going to dip back into Capricorn in September for a few weeks. And then it goes into a 20-year cycle of Pluto in Aquarius. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Tell me about those few weeks. That's something that we can leverage with knowledge and wisdom. what collectively does that open up possibility for? Because I don't believe that astrology is predictive because we have free will. And you and I and the people that we know and are collectively gathered around are using our power of conscious co-creation to influence global consciousness. So there is that free will. But what's the possibility? What does the energy bring in those few weeks?
That is a great question. It's really going to be a hanging on kind of energy. I do not think that it is accidental in the scheme of everything that elections in the United States of America happen
During that.
in November of 2024, right? Oh, I'm getting chills as I say this, right before Pluto moves back into Aquarius. There's a hanging on of the old power, a hanging on of the old dodgy traditions that it is time to let go of. Now, I'm not anti-tradition. I think having some traditions can be fun as a practicer of many old Celtic traditions and things like that. But there's a modernization that needs to happen.
Yeah.
As
Tradition,
we've
if it's
seen.
oppression, is not valuable.
Exactly. I love that. That's a good quote. And so what are we going to see? We're going to see a desire to hang on to the old power. I would not be surprised if we saw some market disruption during that time. But this does not mean if you're in the market, hang on. I'm going to invite you to just hang on. We've had a lot of ups and downs in the market, but don't be surprised about that. I would not be surprised if we saw some changes in the wars that are happening. I'm hoping that we can move towards a ceasefire kind of resolution. And it is possible that we could have additional wars as there's that power, the desire for power and hierarchy. That's Pluto in Capricorn, a desire for power and hierarchy and order in a way that looks like this. And Aquarius says, no, there's enough power for everyone and everyone can be empowered. If you read the story of Prometheus, so there's a group of us astrologers that actually thinks that Uranus should be called Prometheus because there's much more of that Promethean type energy. And if you remember, Prometheus was a titan who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humans because he wanted humans to thrive. So he took something valuable from the hierarchy and gave it to the human. That's the spirit of Aquarius. And so we'll see a hanging on to as much of that power as possible in those few months before we move into this new age of Aquarius, which I believe that we're already in. And now with Pluto in Aquarius, I believe that this is that tightening up of the age of Aquarius.
Oh, beautiful. What a great and glorious and uplifting way to wrap up this section of it. We've talked about what the sun sign is, what the houses, what the sacred geometry, the aspects of astrology are, and how to use that chart in your daily life, debunking Mercury retrograde and really adding some value to some of those things. And I would like to talk about the big five because there is so much to astrology that it can get overwhelming. So it's like when you learn to read a map, there are, okay, what's north, south, east, west? What do these lines mean? Does that mean steep terrain? Is that going to be a struggle? Is that going to be easy? Is that a cliff? Can you get across it? Like some of the basics of map reading. And I see the big five as like the basics. If you only wanted to learn those, you would have a really big, and this is the keyword, advantage over those who don't use the map in getting to the life that we all came here to live. And that's one of play. That's one that feels expansive and safe and full of love and deep connection. And so let's look at how we can take advantage of what is already here in front of us.
Thank you so much. And that's why I really love this big five because it's a game changer if you just know that. So your big five. So a lot of astrologers talk about the big three. If you've gotten into astrology at all, you know about your big three, your sun, your moon, and your rising. Okay. Those are really important. Your sun is the way you brilliantly shine in the world. It's your natural gift. It's what you are here to shine in this world. Your moon is your emotional needs, your non-negotiable needs. Can you imagine if we knew that for ourselves and for our children and other people? If we just knew these things, we could communicate what we need and we could anticipate the needs of others, which for many people is a deep sign of love. If we knew what our partner's moon needs were, emotional needs were, and they knew what ours was, like that right there is a relationship changer.
Yes, you want to decode your partner? If you wish your partner had a manual, absolutely.
We
Understanding
do.
those non-negotiables, because it's not personal then. This person isn't acting this way or responding that way because they're judging me. It's just these are their basic non-negotiable needs. What a loving,
Yep.
absolute gift.
Absolutely. Then your rising is the third piece of that. Your rising sign is the way that you lead. It's actually the way people first experience you. But for us personally, it's a little bit of a stretchy zone. And that means like it can feel a little, we're so comfortable in our moon signs. Children live in their moon signs. And that's a place of comfort for us. Our rising sign is really getting us out there. And so while people might perceive us in this way, it's something that we may not see inside of ourselves and that we're stretching into a little bit. So leadership and the way people experience us is our rising sign. So there's your big three. The other two parts of this is your chart ruler. So whatever your rising sign is, every sign, so this was Aries, Taurus, Gemini, has a planetary ruler. And that ruler and where they are in your chart is playing a big role. So earlier in this podcast, I talked about how I deeply identified as Gemini. Why? My chart ruler, which is Venus, is in Gemini. She's a very important part of my chart. And because, and so it's very supportive energy in that. But that's why it wasn't like I had nothing in Venus or nothing in Gemini and I just identified with Gemini. Like I had many confirming experiences and feelings around that. So your chart ruler is very important. And then the last one, the fifth, is Chiron. Talked about that asteroid earlier in this podcast too. If we know what our wounds are, we can see them and we can do something about them. We're not living from this wounded place where we're not even sure why we're hurting, but we're hurting. And so we're lashing out or sitting in a corner or however we deal with our wounding. When we know what it is, that's when we can turn it into the healing wisdom. That's where we know where we have that compassion. And I've literally seen lives change just from sharing the story of Chiron and then from people seeing where it is in their chart. So again, the big five: sun, moon, rising, the ruler of your chart, and Chiron.
Oh, that's beautiful. And when we're talking about, we're going into this age of Aquarius, and the children that are being born now are being born with less karmic imprinting of just conforming to the old way of doing things. They're coming in with a higher level of wisdom. Their consciousness is more expanded than we came in, higher vibration, and they communicate in a way that's completely different. Their needs are different. And I'm not a mother of young children, but if I had that opportunity, I would think just a fundamental, I would want to know, what is my child's moon sign? What are their essential emotional needs? And what are their wounds? Like, if nothing else, those are the two that stand out to me. And maybe that's my Cancerian mother going, all right, what do we need to know to take care of the emotions? Because these are the leaders that, as the old rulers, the old political systems, as all of that collapses, as it is, and it shall, and it will, they're going to rise up and to understand them and to nurture them. We don't have time in our life to change the course of human history in the way that they do. Our job is to nurture them into their fullest expression, the way I see it. So if there's any parents out there, I would ask you to get curious about how much easier it could be on you and your children if you had this type of awareness.
Yes, 100% moon on all of those things. And if you know what your child's chart or your partner's chart is, and you know what your own is, every time I see a chart, I am just in awe and in deep gratitude for the individual journeys that each of us has. And by knowing what the individual journey is of your partner, of your child, helps you nurture and support and cheer them. And also, if it looks different than maybe what you'd hoped or what you wanted or what you thought was right or from yours, it really gives you this confidence in just stepping back. And yet I know you chose this. This is what's right for you. How can I support and cheer you instead of how can I change you, or you're not fitting the mold, or all these other things. And that's the old way. That's gone. Conformity serves no one but those who want to control and have power.
Absolutely. And taking that layer that you just talked about when you're talking about your partner, not wanting to change them and they're not fitting the mold. Now, what came to mind as you said that was, if I am unaware of my essential emotional needs, my non-negotiables, and I'm unaware of what my wounds are, I have likely had imprinted upon me a mold of behavior that suppresses and oppresses those. And I'm trying to fit somebody else into a mold that doesn't even align with my emotional needs to help me heal my wounds. And this is the put the mask on yourself first. Let's go inside and look at the wisdom of our soul who chose these wounds and turn these wounds into wisdom. Let's flip that around. And then once we heal ourselves, then we can look at each other and go, oh, what are your needs? What's your wound? I want to see you, and just be present in seeing a fuller version of you. And I'm not seeing astrology as I'm pigeonholed into this wound. It's just, it's insight as to some of the personality aspects that I came in with don't define me, but boy, they give me some clarity on what I can do deliberately to transform those into a strength and to heal myself. And so that level of insight on a daily basis, I won't say that I'm obsessed with astrology, but it has become a part of my weekly planning. It's become a part of, why am I not sleeping? What should I be aware of? Oh, I'm going to take some more private time this week, and I'm not going to go to those social events for these things that I know are impacting me personally. And so it's become a very powerful tool. And I want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Moon. I love that you're using it as part of your weekly planning, your monthly planning. There's just so many aspects of how you can use, so many facets of astrology that you can use in your life, but just picking the ones that work for you, just picking the ones that work for you. And I just keep going back to this thing that you were talking about with the kids these days. The kids these days, right? You hear that all the time. And I'm like, no, kids these days are the game changers that we have been setting up for our whole lives. And some before us, we've been paving the way so that they can just really flip things.
Yeah, we're the way showers, they're the way makers. Christina, you do so many different events. You host moon ceremonies, which is where I first met you. You host retreats, and we're doing one together. I'm so honored to be able to bring my wisdom. And honestly, the knowledge that I'm learning from you is helping me refine how I can help women look at their inner wounds. And let's get into the body, right? Let's get into that vehicle and help shift some of the things that have been broken and misimprinted and are out of balance with some clarity and direction. And so how can people find out more about you? And I know that you have an offer going on right now to give people their big five. I was just meeting with a friend yesterday. You just did her big five, and it was just like, yep, it checked the box. It validated this. It made this so much clearer. And it just gave her a fuller sense of self. And so where can people find you, and what are you offering right now?
Perfect. Yes. The easiest place to find me is actually on Facebook, Christina Courtright Jenkins. I put a lot of goodness there. And then a couple of different websites. One is workwiththemoon.com. And then the other one is ChristinaCJenkins.com.
And that is Nkins. Okay, excellent.
And Christina with the C. If you go there, that's my booking page. You can see different offerings that I have. And I hope to see you at the retreat that I'm hosting with Moon. I am so excited, honored, and just over the moon about doing that with you.
Yeah, I'd like to so it's called Desires and Destiny. So we're going to help you get very clear on understanding some of the aspects of the destiny that your soul came in here to live. And you did not come to this life to feel poor and limited and afraid and shamed and lonely. You just didn't. So let's look at some of the things that, yes, it's been challenging for all of us. Let's overcome those together. Let's understand not only your map, let's understand your vehicle. There are so many ways we have forgotten how to even understand our own internal communication system. And these energies, the sacred geometry, are trying to express through us in a way to help us heal. And that's just been unplugged over thousands of years of programming that all of our answers are outside of ourselves. And literally every answer we're ever seeking, all the safety, all the knowing is right inside. It's a matter of learning what needs replugged in, what needs rebalanced, and what needs removed. And so it's 3 days of deep diving in that small group. We're having no more than 11 women right here in Boise, Idaho. And so I'll have a link to register for that and find more information as well.
So excited for that. And in the coming times with Pluto and Aquarius, being anchored in oneself is how we thrive. If we're not anchored in ourselves, I don't know how we can thrive if we don't have that. And that's not to be scary. I'm not like, I think you've heard from this. I don't believe in scary astrology. That anchoring in oneself, that sovereign self that allows you to then nurture and help others. That's how we thrive.
Yeah. The empowering truth is nobody's coming to save you. And you don't need saved. Everything you need is with you. Yeah, absolutely. And it's a wonderful way to gather aligned community who speak a same language, who understand. It's so hard to have conversations at times because unless the people speak your same language and they understand, they're like, what map? What are you talking about? What? No, I'm not my own guru. No, the answers aren't within. And there's just having that aligned community is so essential because anchoring in our own self-truth, but we are not isolated. And so we are connected to everyone and everything, including the planets. But where is your center? Let's move that right back inside of us with some awareness. And then you can navigate the map at will.
So good. I'm so excited for it. And I have loved talking with you today, Moon. Thank you.
It has been a delight. It has been a delight. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I hope you've really got a lot of valuable information through this episode. And all the juicy links to get a hold of Christina are below. And I just follow her. Allow your curiosity to take you places. And when you do, you'll find that the world is a much happier, friendlier place than you might have ever imagined. And until we speak and connect again, I want you to remember that you're perfect just the way you are. Moon out.